According to the World Health Organization, an estimated 40 million people in the U.S. suffer from some sort of anxiety disorder. The National Institute of Mental Health says that 16 million people will suffer from at least one major depressive episode during the course of their lifetimes. That represents about 6.9% of the population. 350 million people worldwide suffer from depression. That represents 5% of the people living in the world. That might seem like a small number, but if 350 million people were to suddenly die, that would not be considered an insignificant event. To put those numbers into perspective, it is estimated that 75 million died from the Black Death in the 1600s. 300 to 500 million people died from the smallpox pandemic in the 20th century. I realize the comparison is an imperfect one. It's a bit of a different story dying from a disease versus suffering from a severe mental illness. The smallpox pandemic and the Black Death are considered among the biggest health crises in human history. So too is this. Recently, on Facebook, I have seen a lot of posts about the End the Stigma campaign about mental illness. I decided to make this video in order to demonstrate my solidarity with the cause. Your cause is my cause. That's me, Dave Korman. I'm 36 years old, a Central Connecticut graduate, a current Dunkin' Donuts employee, and the father of a 4-year-old named Julia. A man with a goofy and oddball sense of humor, but also a man who suffers from anxiety and depression, stemming from his codependent issues. I have struggled with those issues for most of my life, at least as far back as middle school, maybe even further back than that. To put it mildly, I wasn't exactly treated very well back in the day. You wouldn't necessarily be able to tell just by looking at me. In fact, your assumption upon meeting me is that I'm a goofy oddball, and you wouldn't be wrong about that. Below the surface tells a different story. I have a mind that, while good for many things, also is my curse. Occasionally, that mind turns against me. Underneath the humor lies pain. Underneath the smile lies melancholy. Those who suffer put on a mask to hide the pain. Believe it or not, there are plenty more walking around just like me, hidden in plain sight. I consider myself to be high functioning, but nevertheless my struggles have given me a perspective on the issue that a lot of people don't have. According to the National Institute of Mental Health, 1 in 5 kids currently or at some point in their lives will suffer from a debilitating mental disability. There has been a 37% increase in teen depression, 43% increase in children with ADHD. Though frankly I take issue with this particular stat, I'm not sure that it signifies an actual increase in kids with ADHD. I think that it just signifies an increase in the diagnosis of ADHD, that they are way too quick to brand kids with this particular diagnosis. Is the child fidgeting too much? Just give them medications. Never mind that part of the problem is that kids are simply not getting a chance to move around enough. We are cutting things like recess, taking away time that they have to not be sitting around for 8 hours. We are simply not, as a society, providing for our children's needs, nor for the rest of society's needs for that matter. We live in a one-size-fits-all culture, and there's a good chunk of people that just does not work for. According to the CDC, suicides between the ages of 10 to 14 have increased 135% between 2001 and 2014. In that age group, in 1999, there were 242 suicides versus 425 in 2014. Those aren't big numbers, but the fact that it happens at all is pretty darn alarming. Mental health issues such as anxiety have become so common in children that they created a special toy to help them out in the classroom, called fidget spinners. These toys were also designed to help people with autism and other such conditions. It is often my experience when telling somebody that I have anxiety problems, unless they suffer themselves, that they are pretty confused as to exactly what I mean. This surprises me for a couple reasons. One, anxiety is actually a pretty typical word in the English language. And two, as I've previously mentioned, nearly 40 million people suffer from this condition. It seems like every day I am running into someone who experiences some form of anxiety. My question becomes, with the sheer number of people suffering from some form of mental illness, why aren't the issues better understood? I personally believe that we as a nation have a long history of sweeping our problems under the rug. This is a question that I will return to later in the video, but for now, there is something else I would like to talk about. If you are suffering from a mental illness such as anxiety and depression, there's a few ways you can go about dealing with it. If you go to the doctor's office and tell them you have anxiety or depression, they will likely simply prescribe you medications and call it a day. I have personally largely avoided going the medication route to deal with my issues. If you were to go this direction, you would likely be prescribed an antidepressant or a medication that goes under the category of a benzo. They may even refer you to a therapist, which hopefully is covered by your insurance, otherwise it's going to be mighty expensive. In 2010, I began to experience panic attacks. I had actually experienced anxiety in my entire life, but I didn't understand it as such. At the time, I was very anti-medication, even as I was forced to take them. Since then, I have come to understand that there are people that absolutely 100% need medications. Still, I am highly critical of a society whose first instinct is to simply medicate people for any and all problems. Medications certainly aren't a bad starting point, but I don't believe that's where things should end. There are other ways to deal with mental health issues, and I believe that those means should be exhausted first. Again, I fully recognize that there are people that absolutely 100% need medications, but there are plenty of people that are on them that don't really need to be, that they could find some other means to deal with their mental health issue. My main problem with that is that the medications themselves come with plenty of problems. The problems with medications definitely bears some discussion. If you end up taking antidepressants, there is a chance that you can get the wrong combination of medications, which could end up making you worse. For many, antidepressants are godsends, but for some, it can lead to an increase in depression and suicidal thoughts. It is quite possible if you go this route, you will end up a walking, talking pharmaceutical trial as you search for the right medications for you that improve your symptoms at all. And then there's the medications that are used to treat anxiety. Medications like Klonopin or lorazepam, both of which I've been on, go into the category of benzos. I highly recommend that you avoid these particular medications if you can. They are highly habit-forming and very addictive. And unfortunately, benzos have also led to quite a few people dying. The opioid epidemic is a certainly well talked about phenomenon. Much less talked about is the people dying that are on benzos. It's not quite as severe as the opioid crisis, but it's certainly gaining. According to the Center of Disease Control, 22,000 people died from prescription medications in 2013, specifically Valium and other such medications that are designed to treat anxiety, insomnia, and other such conditions. 75% of these cases also involved an opioid. This stat actually makes some sense to me. It isn't surprising to me that somebody who has these mental demons would turn to other means to treat their anxiety. I could have just as easily have gone that direction myself. Turning to opioids or drugs to try to numb the pain, or, at the very least, to drown out the voices in our own head that we battle on a daily basis. It's not a good way to go. In fact, it quite possibly will lead to your death. But it is certainly understandable. So to sum that up, antidepressants are a mixed bag that could result in an even deeper, worsening depression and could even lead to you committing suicide. And the medications to treat anxiety are resulting in drug overdoses. The big winner in all this is not you or I. The big winner is the pharmaceutical companies that profit off of our continuing to take their medications. It's one of the big reasons why doctors' treatments begins and ends at medications. Frankly, there's more profit in keeping you hooked on medications than actually trying to solve your problem. This brings up the question that I have no definitive answer for, but I certainly have theories. Why is this happening? Why are children suffering as much as they are? Why are us adults dying at a crazy rate from benzos or opioids? What's going on in our society? Being constantly inundated with news of bombings, death, destruction, terrorism, I don't think that's helping any. Seems like every morning we wake up to more terrorist acts, more violence in our schools. Back in school, I did a report on violence in the media. What was found in that report was that the percentage of reports on crime didn't match crime rates, making the world seem far scarier than it actually was. I believe that these events aren't happening quite as often as the media is reporting them. It's not unlike the media coverage of shark attacks from a few years ago, which the media vastly over-exaggerated. My point there is I think the media is definitely a factor in why so many people are experiencing anxiety and depression. There's also an increase in economic disparity. Many people are having a hard time paying their bills, and under those circumstances, you likely are going to experience anxiety. Being under constant stress will cause long-term psychological problems, and probably even depression as you feel like you're failing somehow. And whether we like it or not, we are likely passing those feelings down to our children. They sense it. We cannot shield them from it. And lastly, I think it actually also comes down to our increasing technological advancement. Technology which opens up the world and even allows for this video to be made and viewed by lots and lots of people is also the very factor that keeps us all isolated, as we can't meet the people that are right around us. We stop paying attention to the people that we care about. Isolation fosters depression, and depression ruins relationships. You don't need to look very far for an example of that. Depression has definitely impacted my relationship with my friends, my family, and even on occasion my daughter. I should point out the fact that sometimes when it comes to anxiety, depression, or any mental illness for that matter, there isn't always a known cause. It can be as a result of trauma, and it also can be situational, but that isn't always the case. It can be caused by genetics. It can be passed down from one generation to the next. Drugs and alcohol can be an unfortunate means to cope with one's mental health issues, but it also can be the cause. Knowing that anxiety can be genetic, there is a possibility that I will pass my problems down to my daughter. That's not a happy thought. But there is hope in the fact that I will be around to guide her and help her through it. There are a lot of people, unfortunately, that don't have that. As far as our children are concerned, beyond the simple fact that we are stressing them out with our adult issues, there's also the bullying crisis, which is getting worse and worse. Technology hurts us there too, because it's actually easier to bully somebody. You can do it without ever showing your face. You can bully them into killing themselves, essentially, without ever seeing their face. According to the CDC, 20% of high school students are bullied while at school. Additionally, another 16% are bullied online. Our technology basically dehumanizes us. Study after study has shown that bullying causes permanent psychological effects even into adulthood. At any rate, this is a topic that I could go on and on discussing, especially the bullying crisis, and I'd actually like to get to that in a future video. I would actually like to go backwards and discuss an issue that I originally brought up before, but didn't get into very deeply. And that is the question of why, with so many people suffering from these issues, so many people dying from them, that these issues are not better understood. And the answer to that question is what the original point of this video was all about, and that is the stigma attached to mental illness. You tell somebody about your mental health issues and you will get a variety of responses. Some of these responses are well-meaning, but ultimately useless and doesn't actually try to understand the problem. Suggestions such as, hey, just choose to be happy. And while I acknowledge that's possible in some cases, it isn't in all cases. Other responses are significantly less sympathetic. Suck it up. Put on your big boy pants and get over it. Are you an alcoholic? A drug addict? Do you suffer from anxiety or depression or PTSD or bipolar disorder or any of the 1,000 other mental illnesses? The solution to some people is simple. Stop drinking. Stop doing drugs. Nobody forced that needle in your arm. Don't be so sad. Cheer up. Don't worry so much. And if you can't do that, you are weak. Not everybody feels this way, but a significant amount of people in our society thinks exactly that way. Mental illness is weakness, and so is seeking help. I remember being at a bar during the tail end of my panic attack era, which was in 2010. And there was this guy who was discussing his marriage falling apart and couples counseling and all that, and he was really depressed and basically drinking over it. He was talking to somebody else who was listening but not really saying much. After that guy left, this man turned to me and was like, wow, that guy was really depressing. And I said, well, you know, his marriage is falling apart, so that's to be expected, really. He went on to bash couples therapy, and actually therapy in general, basically calling it weakness. I often use an analogy in response to that. Let's say you're swimming in the ocean, and suddenly you find yourself drowning. What are you going to do? Are you just going to silently drown and die, or are you going to call for help? Unfortunately for too many people, they decide to drown. They decide to die. Too many people end up dying because they equate seeking help with weakness. I feel differently. In a society that calls you weak if you have such issues, sometimes it takes more strength and guts to admit that you have a problem and you can't handle it on your own. Unfortunately, as I've demonstrated, seeking help is no guarantee of anything, but it gives you a fighting chance. There are quite a few people that I went to school with that are sadly no longer with us. Some of these people died from drug overdoses. I don't know their stories, but odds are at least a few of these people had mental illnesses that they were using the drugs to combat. How many people did they leave behind? How many kids no longer have a mother or a father? How many of them could have been saved if there was no stigma? How many of them would still be here if we had a better understanding of mental illness and they didn't have to face it alone? Which brings us back to the original question at hand. Why aren't these issues better understood? Because the people that suffer from them keep their mouths shut. Perhaps they'll be lucky and they will get a sympathetic ear. Maybe even somebody that will be there for them. But on the whole, they feel that they are more likely to encounter judgment and people that are going to call them weak. What's needed in our society is less judgment and more empathy. That the people that suffer from anxiety, depression, bipolar disorder, you name it, they need to come forward with their stories. We need to have a national conversation about these issues. And the people that don't suffer, they need to listen. They need to listen and have an open mind about the issues. Because the problem is only growing worse every single year. They aren't the only ones that need to share their story. They aren't the only ones that suffer. The people that live with and take care of the mentally ill also suffer, and we need to hear from them as well. We cannot count on our leaders to help us out in our cause. They are the ones that are cutting funding for mental health institutions. I would like to emphasize the fact that this should not be a partisan issue. This doesn't fall neatly into the right-wing, left-wing divide, nor should it. We are all suffering from this, and any attempt to make this a partisan issue hurts the cause. And neither of the two major parties are good on this issue. Nor are they really good on any issue, but that's besides the point. And make no mistake, the people that suffer from these issues, they are the people that you encounter every single day. They are the people that serve your coffee, take out your trash. They are your lawyers, even your doctors. They are the people that you care about. Your sons, your daughters, your mothers, your fathers. According to the National Institute of Mental Health, 5.7 million people suffer from bipolar disorder. 24 million people at any given time suffer from PTSD. 51 million people worldwide suffer from schizophrenia. I could do this all day. The list goes on and on. In future videos, I hope to discuss these issues at further depth. We need to come up with solutions, and we need to do it now. We simply have to do better for ourselves. We have to do better for our children. That's what we have to keep in mind. It's our children that are bearing the brunt of this. It is my sincerest hope that this video will help jumpstart that conversation, as many others are trying to do, so that we can all have a better future, so that we can end the stigma. Can we end mental illness? Probably not. I've accepted that there is no real cure for me. Sure, I could take antidepressants or other types of medication, which I've already covered is not an easy road and no guarantee of anything. Like I said, I'm pretty high functioning, so I am not sure it's worth taking the risk of being made worse. Although there are times where I've been scared enough to go that route. Plus, I've always had the fear that medications might alter the good things about me. You can't have the good without the bad. My mind, the one that endlessly tortures me, the one that never shuts up, the one that sometimes I wish I could shove a stake up there just to get it to stop, is also the very mind that helps in my creative endeavors, such as the creation of this video. No, there is no cure for me, just better management. Perhaps with an open dialogue, we can find a way to reduce mental illness in our children and our society at large. Maybe we can better manage the problem and find better treatments. At the very least, with the stigma ended, perhaps, maybe those who struggle with severe mental illness will no longer feel like they struggle alone.